afternoon. Welcome to the inaugural COE Research and Innovation Forum. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to have a good turnout today. I really appreciate that. I know it's a busy time of year. We're the week before Thanksgiving. We're in the last few weeks of the semester. I know a lot's going on, but I think it's great that we can take some time to get together and talk about big ideas and strategic things together. The goal of this event is to test the hypothesis that we could actually do a forum like this. As the Associate Dean for Research and Infrastructure, one of the things I'd like to do on a regular basis is to convene and have an opportunity for conversations on things related to our research and technology transfer enterprise. And as I was, kind of coming on board, I'm now a little bit more than a year into my role. So it's kind of hard to say that I'm new here, but I'm still learning. And one of the things I've been learning a lot about in my first year is all of the great work that goes on, both in the College of Engineering, but also in the university as a whole on innovation and entrepreneurship. And what really caught my eye, and I've known this for decades. I've been on the faculty here for more than 30 years, and I've known that NC State is really a powerhouse and a national leader on innovation and entrepreneurship. And in terms of, metrics, we're in the top 10 of any university in the United States. But I personally haven't been that involved myself, and I thought, well, I need to learn this because I need to represent all of you. And also, I think there's an opportunity where I know many of you are very active in this, but I think there's many of our faculty who probably are not. And if we can share some information that for those who would be inclined to do more of this would help them, that's really part of the goal of this specific session. And I think part of the goal in general is, I would like to, maybe once a semester just convene on a topic of kind of strategic interest for our research and technology enterprise. And so, I'm thinking about for the spring having another event like this. So one thing, we'll probably send you a survey after this just to get some feedback from you, both on what you thought of today's event and also suggestions you might have for future events. But I also, want to say that as I, was circulating around the college and university, I really had the privilege to get to meet all of the panelists who are here and many others, and it occurred to me, I should be asking these people to be on a panel, and every person I asked immediately said yes. So I'm really grateful for that you were willing to do this. And so I don't want to take too much more time other just to give you that broad context. I'll give you a little bit of context about what we want to do today. I'm going to start off by introducing myself briefly, and each panelist will introduce themselves, and then we'll just get into Q&A, and I'll start with a moderator question, but if after that every question comes from the audience, that's great. I have a list of backup questions in case this group is shy, because I know that faculty here are very shy, right? No. So the purpose of this session is to really highlight strategies to, maybe in part diversify, research funding opportunities through ways of engaging on the industry side, and some of that's by starting up new companies and having them grow and then become major funders of your research. That's probably the long game, right? That's not going to happen like this week. And also to think about, how can the work you're doing help solve practical problems and support innovation initiatives and entrepreneurial engagement. And so this panel, they're leaders in all, I think pretty much all aspects of this topic. And the goal here is to share perspectives and best practices for building resilient portfolios that connect academic excellence with real-world impact. And I'm not going to stand for the next 90 minutes, so I'm going to sit. But as I said, I'm Chris Frey. I'm the Associate Dean for Research and Infrastructure. And what I'd like to do is just go down the line here for give your name, affiliation, the numbers of your last 5 patents, and the titles of your last 20 papers. No, maybe just your name and affiliation to start. Yeah, okay.
That's easy.
Yeah.
It won't look equal
Yeah.
to the number. That's
Okay.
Hi, I'm Priya Gill, and I'm going to the College of Engineering, and I'm the Resident Director of the Engineering Entrepreneurship Program, whose scope we are growing from just not undergrad, but also to faculty and faculty.
Hi, my name is Mark. So this is if you were working, so talk loud.
Is it on?
This is
Oh,
it's on.
oh, it is on. Okay.
Anyway,
You heard me.
my name is Tim Martin. I'm the Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor for Ventures Investments in Office of Research and Commercialization. I work in the Tech Transfer Office, helping startups spin out of the university by support from funding, team development, and hopefully getting to market with whatever the products are. Also, a two-time graduate of the NC State's engineering program. So, biomedical engineer, a lot of that.
I actually definitely need a mic. I managed to lose my voice yesterday, so luckily it's back, at least somewhat. So I'm Ashley Brown. I am a professor in biomedical engineering, and I lead a research group that's focused on biomaterials for hemostasis and wound healing. One of the other hats that I wear is also directing the Comparative Medicine Institute. But the primary reason I think I'm on this panel is I co-founded CellSum Biotechnology Incorporated, which is focused on spinning out one of the technologies from my lab. So we developed a synthetic platelet technology to treat bleeding after trauma and surgery, and so we've been focused in CellSum on pushing that technology towards the clinic. And with regards to the number of my last 5 patents, I'm going to leave that question to Brian.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Kranos Williams. I am a professor in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department with a partial appointment in the Plant and Microbiology Department. I also serve as the platform director for the Data-Driven Plant Sciences platform for the North Carolina Plant Sciences Initiative. In terms of my research group, we focus on the development of computational intelligence and multi-scale modeling approaches for understanding both plant and agronomic systems. I think my role on this panel probably stems more from the work that we've done with companies and other stakeholders in North Carolina. This idea of developing research that is particularly targeted for addressing solutions that are specific to agricultural stakeholders in North Carolina. The fact that we've developed various products that are actually implemented within certain facilities, developed dashboards, data collection, workflows that are actually being utilized by stakeholders today. And I guess I'll just hold at that and just address the questions as they come.
Hey everyone, my name is Brian Eller. I'm the Interim Assistant Vice Chancellor for the Office of Technology Licensing. I know, it's me and Tim have all the words in our titles. So I guess my role at the university, so I manage a 14-person team that is trying to manage the intellectual property process, commercialization process here at NC State. So as my role on the panel, so we're trying to take those technologies from that disclosure stage, from your research stage, and going through the process of maybe patenting, protecting that, commercializing that, licensing it to a company, marketing to companies, and then hopefully those companies will bring back research dollars to the university. And we've tracked that metric, and last year was like probably 5 to 6 million is what we tracked, and probably over 40 million in the course of the years we've been in business. So I'm excited to chat to you about commercialization here today, and with that I'll turn it back to Chris.
Great. Well, first, I think this is a great panel. So let's first, I'd like to recognize the panel with a round of applause for being here. And for what's to come. I'm going to start with a question. because I think we'll get into a lot of details about the how and so on, but I kind of want to ask you about the why, and specifically, what do you find most rewarding about engaging in the innovation and entrepreneurship space? Like, how has it benefited or impacted you or people or entities you care about?
Since I have the mic, I'm going to I'll answer quickly. So to me, what's most exciting about engaging in entrepreneurship is actually seeing the things that you're working on in the lab, getting close to actually impacting the areas that you want to impact. So, as a biomedical engineer, we're always focused on developing solutions to impact healthcare, and sometimes when you're working on things at the bench, it can seem like quite far away, and that is still true because the pathways for some of these technologies can be quite extensive. But spinning out a company, you can really start to see the things that you're doing in the lab, having a clear path to getting into actually affecting change in how patients are being treated. And so when we talk about things that get us excited about it to get out of bed in the morning, that's certainly the case for me. I mean, as soon as we started working on these kinds of technologies, all the way back when I was a postdoc, I was interested in starting a company and thinking about how we could push these things forward. So just seeing the real world implications of what we're working on in the lab is what makes me most excited.
So my story in this is basically I teach people how to start a company, whether it's undergrads in Texas Tech. I even worked with faculty, I have mentored a lot of faculty startups. And my big joy comes is what I call bragging rights. So when I have teams from my class or faculty teams I've mentored medical doctors, students of all different, like from med school in Texas Tech there. So I came here from Texas Tech a year and a half back, right? And so student teams, any of those, yesterday there was a Miller Fellowship program, and we were there, Tim and I, and there were 2 students of mine there who had started their companies, And so all of those, because I feel very strongly that it is us engineers who can lead us to the next stage, There's a lot of work happening in labs, there's a lot of work that students have in their minds and all the ideas that they have. If we can bring all this out, there's so much of momentum that can come out of it. And my job as a facilitator is how do we get all of this out and how do we get everyone to be successful and get all these research from labs into the world and these ideas from students' heads into real companies. And I have several companies that are going concerns that I have mentored, and as I watch them, and there's a faculty, in fact, in Texas Tech, I had a faculty team that I mentored who was a colleague in my own department. It was an interesting relationship, but in the end, it's still working. It's called Women Life. They work with C. elegans, and they have their elegance went to space, and we celebrated it went on SpaceX, So things like that, all of those, I feel just like the future is research coming into the real world, and if I can, as a small part, contribute to that, that is why I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add quickly. I think one of the things I find most interesting and rewarding as part of this process is the growth of graduate students and postdocs who come in the door as technical experts, most likely the people who have been working on these technologies for years, gotten to the point where they're transitioning out of their technical role and trying as kind of a leap of faith into the business world. And I think there's a lot of programs. I'm the lead instructor and PI for the I-Core program at NC State, where we see those people start. And I think Ashley's technology has been through that program, and I think there's a lot of examples of I-Core teams that maybe year, 2, 3 years later then make that transition into a startup company. And those graduate students or postdocs who at the time were just maybe doing it because their PI told them to, but then they start to understand the other side of the world and the opportunities that exist based on what they can apply and how they can actually translate their technical skills and build off of that into the business world. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And that's what I did as a graduate student. I spun a company out when I was at NC State, and that's what got me involved in what I do today. And so while it wasn't the straight line path from undergrad, graduate student to faculty or to research role in a large company, but I think it's very rewarding, and I think there's a lot of students on campus that could benefit from those same types of things. So that's one of the things I try to do as much as possible, is letting people know about the opportunities that exist that are not the traditional path or maybe what the standard path is for most researchers.
I mean, for me, it kind of falls into like 3 categories. One aspect is this notion of translational work. I think that has increased over time in terms of my research program, where it started out to be a much smaller percentage and then it grew to be something that was much larger. And that for me was a lot better, because I was able to then see kind of how the work that we were doing was really being translated into the actual community. And this also kind of connects to the underlying things that drive me research-wise as a whole. So I've been an interdisciplinary researcher, since I started at NC State, and this idea of communicating and talking with individuals with other expertise than my own, and using that communication to solve problems has always been something I was interested in. And being able to couple that with the communication not just to researchers outside of my discipline, but actually stakeholders outside of my discipline, who themselves have a wide array of expertise and knowledge, and coupled with the things that I can provide from my lab's perspective, being able to then address some really complicated problems. And at the core, engineers are problem solver by heart. And the actual potential of the work. So the more and more that we interacted with these different individuals, the more and more I realized that there's a lot of unsolved problems out there. And this allows the growth of my research lab in a very dynamic manner. So as a result, it really creates the next problem and the next problem and the next problem, which allows me to continue not only growing my lab, but also grow the types of applications and things that we work on.
So I'll echo some of that. I also have an engineering background and a law background as well. I also believe in solving problems, but they may not be the technical problems. They may be, legal problems or business problems. And so I guess satisfaction of helping people sometimes navigate bureaucracy and helping them get to those end goals and make it as smooth as possible. That's how I see the role of our office, is to make these processes easily understandable as we can, as smooth as we can, and try to help you enable the success so that you guys can go out there and commercialize what you're working on. And so that gives me satisfaction when we're able to solve those problems to make those things happen.
Awesome, thank you. I do want to open up to questions from the audience, but if there isn't one yet, yeah, I didn't think it would really be shy. But if I have other questions I can ask you. So while the audience is thinking about a question, so for someone who's never really gotten into this, I think this can seem very daunting, and already some acronyms were mentioned, and there's some resources. And is there sort of a right way for a faculty member, for example, to kind of dip their toe into this and test the waters and see, is this for me?
I'll start from this end and give my perspective on it. So I think anyone who's interested in commercialization at the university, and I think by you all, you must have some interest, and I would encourage you to make your colleagues interested as well. But I think the starting point, at least from my perspective, is you can always have a conversation with my office, and that's either simply sending us an email and talking to us, or submitting a disclosure online. So that process for us, at least in commercialization, is when you have that, that idea that you think, is commercializable, something that you're willing to work on, hopefully before you've published on it, okay, because that could lead to issues, but you'll disclose it onto our portal, and then one of my team members or myself will meet with you in 30 days of that, and then we can kind of converse and say, hey, what's our strategy for commercialization? Are we going to market this? Are we going to file a patent on this? Are we going to do a startup company on this? If we're going to try to find an existing company that might be interested in this, or hey, this came out of funded research. What are the obligations we have to our funding agency that we have to go through and meet all those obligations? And then there's a whole ecosystem of partners that we can tap into to help you along that way. So it takes a village to grow these things. And so, at least from my perspective, the starting point for my office is that initial disclosure, which can be done on the internet and through our innovators portal.
I mean, for me, I think understanding that everything doesn't have to be known at the beginning is very important. Even for me to this day, there are many aspects of this entire process that still remains somewhat daunting and to some extent somewhat unknown. But the idea of kind of getting started in a space where this can be applicable, I think that's what just needs to be done. Kind of putting one foot in front of the other, starting to interact and interface with different individuals that you think your research can impact, and just getting started. Many times, especially at the beginning, getting to a point where you just have an initial prototype or an initial system. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the final one. But getting it started, getting it implemented becomes the first step. And then iterating through that process and not having the anxiety, in a sense, at the beginning to think that you have to kind of get to the end goal. And this means gradually kind of increasing and gradually expanding those components if this is something that you're interested in. So that's probably the one thing that I wish I was more settled on when I got started, because now I realize that that's just the way to actually proceed. At least that was for me.
I think I'll echo what's been said already and add a little bit. So if you have an idea that you think could have some commercial potential, making sure that you're disclosing that as soon as you think that might be the case is certainly a really good idea, because then you can understand some of the implications of that. When do you need to file IP, if it makes sense to do so, making sure you're not publicly disclosing things so that way you don't get in a situation where then you can't move forward. So I think that is by far the most important step, is just understanding the relationship with how early you need to submit IP and having close conversations with Brian and his team. But beyond that, once you've started to get involved and have conversations, becoming aware of the multitude of opportunities to support commercialization across NC State and the Triangle. There really are just a ton of resources here, and taking advantage of those at different stages. Tim can probably speak to this a little bit better than myself in terms of the details, but once you have a disclosure file, then you can start going after things like the Chancellor's Innovation Fund and other opportunities that can start to get funding for translationally focused research, and all of these things, you can get involved in ICOR, and all of these can help you start dipping your toe in the water and start thinking about the path forward and what the next steps might be. And as Kranos just said, it's not, you don't have to have everything figured out all at once, and so just making that first step of disclosing your ideas and then taking advantage of resources.
Those are all great things to mention. I think our standard response when somebody's interested or thinking about doing a startup or thinking about commercialization, I always point them directly to our ICOR program. We run 3 cohorts per year. It's a pretty low-touch kind of engagement into the startup process. We do ask you to do 20 interviews with who you think a potential customer could be over about a 5-week period. And from my perspective, that's probably the lowest amount of work you'll do for a startup company you'll ever do, because it takes a lot of effort. You can ask anybody who's been around the block and gone down through this process before, and if that's not a fit, then maybe that's an indication kind of where your path would be. And I think we have options if you don't want to do a startup company. There's definitely other options out there of how to commercialize your technologies, but it's a good way to understand what does the market think about what I'm doing. And are my assumptions that I've been making based on the academic approach to it accurate in the actual field? So whoever is going to be using this product, if it's on the market, how do they solve it today? What are the problems that are associated? And you can often learn a lot about the mindset of who you'd be selling to or who you'd be producing products for by going through that process. We also have a strong partnership with the Innovation Entrepreneurship Program at NC State with the Technology Entrepreneurship Commercialization Certificate Program. So it's an MBA course, 2 classes that they teach out of that program, and we seed those classes with projects from our office. So often those are technologies that are on the fence. They're not really sure if it's a startup opportunity, maybe it's a license opportunity for a large company, but they need more data, more information. And maybe at that point in time, that research team doesn't have the capability to go through ICOR, Well, we have teams of MBA students, PhD students, other master's students on campus that can work on those technologies on your behalf, and then they come back with a report at the end of the semester. So those are kind of our two main kind of entry points into the process. And then from there, there's millions, literally millions of dollars available for you before you start the company and after you start the company, where you don't have to give up any equity in the business. And we have plenty of examples of startups at NC State that have gone down that path and are hitting key milestones and really accomplishing kind of startup objectives through that path, and then setting themselves up for a fundraise in the future. So I think we've tried to map out the process and understand where are the gaps and fill in those gaps from our team, and then find partners in the region and in the United States that can help fill those gaps as you move forward.
So I'm new to NC State, but I know a little bit. I spent some time talking to Brian and Tim in terms of the resources that are available, and I definitely would plug the ICO program. It's a little bit of investment in your time, but it also, and it is funded by NSF, and the NC State is a hub, so we have some advantage in terms of, and the ICO has two levels, the regional and the national. And if you finish the regionals, which is the 20 interviews, and you feel this is not your thing, then you can start and say, okay, I have this idea, it is properly disclosed, and can you guys take it to the next step? Alternately, if it's your thing and you get excited about it, then I think we have a pathway to get you to nationals, which is 100 interviews. And by the time you finish the nationals, you are going to be much more sure of what they try to do in ICO is try to find a product market fit. So I'm also an ICO instructor and certified, right? And we do a product market fit and trying to find out who's your customer, what is the value that you're offering. So once you figure that out, and many times, sometimes you go one way, and to the point earlier that Kranos said, everything is not sure, everything is, and as a faculty, I think the biggest thing that you can do is, by dipping your toes, trying to change your mindset a little bit, in terms of, okay, I have to go talk to people, I have to talk to strangers, sometimes I don't, I send my student off to go talk to them, you know, and there are all strategies they talk about in terms of learning more about your idea and its commercialization potential. And I think you didn't plug your foundations, but I will do it for you. So we also have a foundations program, which is after our code, which if you are interested, no, but I think we're going to talk about which is trying to get you closer to getting investor ready, and then we are working, Chris and I are working on a program in College of Engineering to further help with resources, and I'm working closely with Tim and Brian, to work through each of these. But to me, the first thing is give it a try. Give it a try and see whether it's for you. It's going to be a lot of fun. That's all I can say.
I just want to say, Tim, you have millions of dollars.
But you need an average, you see?
I'm teasing it, so you have to come and find out.
Yes,
Come see Tim.
that is a good marketing. Steve?
Yeah, simple question, really about best practices. So you kind of brought us through some of the preliminaries. Eventually, we're going to get to either spinning our own company or working with another company. Do you have best practices from your perspective on licensing?
So the question is best practices on licensing.
I think the real tough part is to try to find the licensee, right? So finding a company that wants to take on the technology, and at that point it's a negotiation with that existing company. And then to the startup end, I guess it's a really difficult place. You know, we want to form the startup company. We think this is a viable business opportunity, and then we want to do the licensing of it. So the actual licensing, I mean, that's our office is, the office that you go to. We're responsible for negotiating that license, getting the contract out, enforcing the license agreement, collecting the revenues, and ironically, as you're all NC State employees, if it's your IP that's being commercialized, you do get 40% goes back to the inventors who did it. So you get a personal financial benefit from that license agreement. And so yes, I mean, in our office, we do have best practices. We've done quite a few number of license agreements. Actually, we're the number one in terms of total number of license agreements of universities without medical school. So we have a lot of experience doing this. And so if you're a startup company and you're negotiating, with the university for kind of your own technology, say you're an entrepreneur doing that, we'll guide you through the process. I try to make it I guess, financially risk-free as possible. And we have, you know, we also have a list of law firms that you can work with that are worked a lot with the university, that are very friendly to our entrepreneurs as well, that can also advise on that agreement. But I'm happy to walk through people line by line through every license agreement, explain why we have those terms and what those are all about. And usually, again, in that process, before we even get to the actual contract language, you know, we want to get some kind of term sheet, right? And so, you know, in our typical term sheet, you know, there's usually some kind of equity stake the university will take in a startup company, if it's a startup company. There'll usually be some kind of running royalty on a product sale. There'll usually be some kind of milestones or commercial milestones or diligence milestones in the agreement. If it's a large established company, obviously we're probably not going to get some kind of equity, but we may get some kind of upfront cash fee. And so that's our office has a pretty experienced job of doing those kind of negotiations, and I feel like we've done we're pretty friendly with our startup companies, and that's why we're able to do so many per year.
I'll add a little bit to that in terms of if you want to be a good licensee candidate, it's good to establish product market fit, and also if you have some people who have customer testimonials and things like that, then that makes you much more attractive to a potential licensor, and then it makes Brian's job probably easier if you come in and say, hey, I talked to, there are all these people interested in my product, and can you then immediately say, for example, for Ashley's product, I know she's doing it herself, but if that was the path, somebody like Pfizer or somebody would be very interested if she could establish that there are people who are interested in this product. So I think that is something you can do on the side, on your own, through ICO and other methods, to establish that there is a need, there's a real pain here, people are interested in it, and I have the technology, and here you go, I'll give it to you for whatever price he can negotiate. So that would be an additional thing to it.
Yeah, and I'll mention from the kind of startup entrepreneur role, we definitely have examples and mapped out a process for what your engagement would look like with a startup company. Based on the industry, based on the market application, the path forward for you can look very different. And what your goals as the founder of that company also deeply impact what that path looks like. And so some people are just interested in having a business that supports a few employees, maybe brings in a couple $1 million in revenue, and is a nice business that can serve customers over a long period of time. It's probably not set up well for an investor. There are companies that are founders that come to our office and say, we want to get a $1 billion acquisition in 5 years. Well, that's going to dictate a different path. That's probably going to mean you're going to have to raise a lot of venture capital money, move very quickly, identify people who can take roles in those startups very early to take on the burden of doing that work. And then there's often somewhere in between. You aren't really sure what your path's going to be, but we have examples and worked with lots of faculty. I've been doing this for 10 years across 3 different universities, and have probably personally worked with at least 100 startup companies at this point. And so I've seen a lot of different ways that this can work. And it's not always, there's not one size fits all, this is what you're going to do with this startup company. But I think we have best practices about how we advise what to do and what try not to do. Because people can try to assume that they're going to lead it forever, be CEO all the way to exit. That's probably not accurate or feasible if you're a faculty member at a university. And so finding where is your exit point? Where is the point where you are stepping out of that leadership role? Sometimes it takes a little bit longer than you'd hope based on funding or other things going on. We might have a pandemic, we might have tariffs, we might have all sorts of geopolitical things that happen that will impact your startup company. And so you have your plan, you try to stick to it, but then reassess. And I think working with our office, we have people that we can tap into from our networks. We have a network of over 100 experienced entrepreneurs that are affiliated with NC State that we can patch into your startup. And then there's investors and all sorts of other people that we interact with all the time of trying to get the right people in front of you and help you with that path. Because we know that for a lot of times it's your first time through and it's all new and we're here to help. That's really what my 100% of my job is to help the startups out of NC State be successful. And so, yeah, I think we've thought about it a lot. We're always iterating and coming up with new programs and initiatives and things like that to help you to get to that next milestone. But I think we have a pretty good handle on how to support you and what works best for the type of company you want to be one day.
Great. Question back there?
Yeah. So this is very simple, but you mentioned that ICOR is kind of the first door to walk through in a lot of cases. There was an email that went out like a week or two ago, like responding to that form is how to get involved, correct? That's
Yes. Yeah. So there's a, I think we'll follow up with you. Amy Parker from my office manages that program. So if you've applied or you've shown interest based on that email, then you should get a follow-up from us soon to meet and talk more about it.
lovely. I did that yesterday.
Great. Awesome. Good to hear.
Let's see, Ali, and then we'll go back.
Yeah.
Brian, you were talking about filing disclosures and mentioned about publication. And I have to step out, maybe you answer it, so a little bit more. But what would be the effect of publishing that board on the whole process? Is there a timeline that you shouldn't be publishing like before that?
You see, you didn't miss, I can give the full explanation, so, and I'm happy to yeah, so under, basically for patentability, if you make an enabling public disclosure, so for instance, it allows someone, this is illegal, but it allows someone to have an ordinary student to reproduce the invention. So just hypothetically, you could black box something and say, hey, here are the benefits, but you don't tell people how. But if you explain how you do the invention such that people seeing that publication, and the other publication could be a YouTube video, it could be a Reddit post. It's just as long as it's made publicly available. That's a problem in the United States. You have a one-year window from that application date to file a patent. If you exceed that one-year window, the patent office will reject that patent. But for the rest of the world, they are on pretty much a strict novelty system. Like 99% of the countries are. There's a few exceptions, like the US, have a grace period. But for the rest of the world, pretty much, from that date of publication, you cannot get a patent, right? So for instance, you'd say you had a great product, and you think, okay, Europe's going to be my market, but you publish it, and now you can't get any kind of European protection after you've done that publication. So that's why we encourage people to come to our office, is before that publication. But I would say this, so for people that, okay, I didn't know about that rule, and I've already published it, am I out of it right now? And I think the answer to those rules, I think your research is always evolving. You're always doing new things. You're always making improvements, right? So I'm sure this is not the only great idea that you have, right? I'm hoping not. And you'll have some new great ideas, and we can work on those new great ideas. So that's like a learning experience, right? And so that does sometimes present issues, but we're still trying to work with people. But yeah, so as long as we can educate our faculty or educate our colleagues about that, that'd be great. Come to our office before that publication.
In that scope of figuring out what is patentable, there is a lot to be gained from commercializing things that aren't patentable or that may not have a straight line path to filing a patent. And so that our office is, I think, pretty successful in coming up with know-how licenses, where essentially the data, the code, or a lot of times this happens in software, where it may not be feasible to file a patent on it, but there's still a good commercial opportunity out there. And it's basically stuff that wouldn't be shared in a normal publication, but is used to enable the innovation. That information can be licensed to a startup company and can have great value. So I think that's becoming more and more common because things are moving pretty quickly. And in terms of AI and these other tools that are coming online, they aren't always easily fit into a standard patent pathway, but I think our office still wants to commercialize those and enable opportunities for those to happen.
I'll add to that and think about it until you said that, is that there's a saying that if you cannot have a patent, you can have traction. Where what you go and then you go and get all these customers, at which point the patent doesn't matter because now you're so valuable because you have all these people. And that's like me beating a dead horse again and again and saying, go find the customer, go find the customer. But that is another way to commercialize if you have already published or there's no chance of getting a patent. Because that's not the only way. A lot of companies exist which do not work on, which don't have a patent to back them. But there are other ways to get there.
So I'm going to go to the gentleman in the gray.
From UCD. So between the start and the exit, I think there are different phases such as developing prototypes, scaling up, and then eventually exit. So my question is, how does the role of faculty member evolve in these phases? What to focus on and what to avoid?
I can tackle that one. So we are, to provide a little bit of context, so I co-founded our company at the end of 2019, so right before the pandemic, great time, which allowed us to start putting in SBIR applications. And really early on, so I was a CEO initially and was doing a lot, and that was really required early on because there wasn't anyone else to do it, right? But to the point that Tim made earlier, my role has definitely evolved as the company has had some success and has grown a bit. So once we obtained our first funding was an SBIR from NIH. So once we obtained that funding, then we were able to hire a full-time person. We got a few more SBIRs. We were able to bring on additional people. Got a DoD grant, and at that point, once we had started to grow and we were moving from initial kind of prototyping work, as you described, to starting to really focus on scale-up and manufacturing and mapping out an FDA pathway and looking at those milestones and regulatory. At that point, we really needed to build out our team, much more than where it was. And this was about 3 years ago. It was very clear to me that it was getting much bigger than I could possibly handle, given all the other things that I had on my plate as a faculty member. So actually at that point was working really closely with ORC and with Tim on trying to identify a CEO. And so this is where it really, again, is great to be able to tap into the ecosystem and the networks that are here at State and around the Triangle. So Tim put us into contact with a number of people that we interviewed. None were quite good fits, and so we had a lot of conversations about how to move forward and what made the most sense. And so we ended up promoting our first full-time employee, who had happened to be a graduate student. She was my first graduate student. She ended up taking on the role of CEO and is still in that position now. And so that's allowed her, I think that speaks again to the point that Tim made a minute ago about opportunities for students and postdocs to grow and really jump into these roles. And so once that happened, I was able to kind of take a step back. So I'm still on the board. I'm still a senior scientific advisor, I think is my official title. So still involved in the company, but I'm not talking to vendors every day, right? I'm still providing a lot of guidance on company direction and what we should be going after. I've been helping with conversations with investors. But as the company has grown, definitely have started to take a step back. And I think for most companies to be successful as faculty members, we have way too much on our plate. It's not that most companies are not are going to need you to step back. And so I think realizing that and realizing when the time is really important. But the entrepreneurial bug will definitely bite you, because I think I'm ready to start my next company. I don't know if it agrees to you.
I mean, I think for us, we're very much the very early stages of development. We built a network of individuals that we have the ability to work with, and we are looking at identifying a commercialization strategy. At the same time, the research has to move forward. So identifying opportunities to be able to fund the work so that we can continue to develop these ideas become important. So me, myself, and my other collaborators, Mike Krumov and Daniel Jones, will continually identify new funding opportunities, continually identifying new partners. And through that, the role as a faculty member kind of remains the same. But at the same time, we still have to go through this process in terms of having these conversations and trying to identify which components would be ideal to effectively commercialize. Now, what becomes challenging is that the research, kind of what was mentioned earlier, the research continues to grow and the ideas continue to grow. And being able to kind of sort through those is probably one of the most challenging aspects. But that's kind of how we've been facing it, continuing to try to expand partners, continuing to try to expand in terms of funding opportunities, and then continue to have a conversation in terms of commercialization strategies.
Yeah, I think to add to that, I definitely agree with, I think, everything that Ashley and Kranos had said about their path and kind of what roles they've had. And I think from our perspective, we expect that there's going to be a lot of time commitment from whoever's trying to get it off the ground at the early stages. But there's a reason why we call them spin-offs or spin-outs of the university. We want them to be their own entity and to be successful on their own. And so there often is time where you're applying for grants, you're talking to investors, you're trying to get money in the door to bring other people onto the team. You can sometimes accomplish that with equity, where you're giving away part of the business to bring those people in. But in our experience, having cash on hand to be able to pay somebody a salary is the best way to recruit people that can actually do the work. Because there's a lot of advisors, there's a lot of people in the area and in the startup community that can give advice and do things for equity, and it's sometimes hard to figure out if they're actually contributing towards the mission. Or if you're paying someone a salary, or at least contract-based work, that's something that we're moving towards with our Chancellor's Innovation Fund, is embedding that as part of the process. So if you get $100,000 from the Chancellor's Innovation Fund, you have $50,000 for research and about $46,000 to start the company. And we're not just giving you that money to go incorporate and then go on a worldwide trip. We'd like you to find who is that first employee going to be. And we can put a small project together with that person to see, is it a good fit? Before you sign the papers, you essentially become co-founders of the business. You can really figure out, is this a good fit or not? And so that's one thing we've added. And we're also adding a new program called Boost Fund earlier in spring that is going to be focused on about $5,000 to $10,000 consulting projects to bring in those experts to say, is this a good engagement? Are they actually worth the money? Will they help bring more money in as they grow with the business? So we're putting kind of action with, there's different programs that will be available. But yeah, I think in most contexts, the faculty member will have a high amount of engagement at the beginning when things are getting started. But there will be a point in time where we'll ask you, or you'll ask the team to basically take on more of that responsibility. And it's up to the success of how funding comes in and the path that goes forward. And I think one thing we try to always talk about with faculty members is, once you've gotten funding or you've gotten something kind of off the ground, we don't really need more new ideas for that specific application. They just need to get that thing that you came up with probably 2 or 3 years ago to market. And it may take another 2 years, another 5 years. There's startups that I worked on at UNC in 2015 that are just now getting to market. And that's sometimes how long it takes, depending on the industry and the application area. And they're not always medical technologies. Deep tech is hard, and it takes a long time. And so I think there's a lot to be gained from the team taking on the uninteresting parts of commercialization, which is manufacturing, distribution, sales, support, all the things that are not R&D. And that process takes a long time. And so I think helping to understand what you're really good at and what your value is to the startup may change as the startup grows. And then there's we always encourage that opportunity to come back, do another one. Every 3 to 5 years, come knock on the door and talk about what you want to do next. Because we always have faculty that kind of come through that process. And once they see the path and maybe they were successful, maybe they weren't, they learn from that experience. I'm a 2-time failed startup entrepreneur. I'm still here doing things. So I think it's part of the process. We know everything's not going to be successful, but the more you understand the process and you get engaged with commercialization in general, then I think the better you'll get at it. And you'll understand kind of what you learn and where you fit, I guess, in that context.
I know Young had a question, and then we'll go to the back again.
Most part of my question. So I was trying to a little about some technologies, right? So we have interest to start a startup, but oftentimes we would like to wait for doing the proposal or doing the business person, right? And often a lot of people will pursue the proposal, right? To do the business side. But oftentimes the timing may not work, or it may never happen because they move on to other positions, right? So I think actually this situation?
Yeah, and I'll bring up one example or one area that has seen growth in the past probably 5 years is something called a venture studio. And these are investors who are coming into the university and looking at things that are pre-startup. So before you actually form the company, and sometimes some of them, we met with one yesterday, it's in life sciences, they'll actually invest in things that have moved to incorporate. But they'll show up and look at potential technologies that could be startups. And they bring to the table money, so they usually put in $300,000 to $500,000 and a team, fractional CEO, CFO, chief operating officer, different people like that to surround the technology team. The one big caveat with it is you give up most of the company from day one. So when you form a company, the founders own 100%. With a venture studio, it's probably closer to 50 to 80% you're giving up. So you're starting with only about 10 to 20% of the equity. That is a big sacrifice you're making to the commercialization path. But the advantage is you skip ahead 2 or 3 steps. So you don't have to go out and find that person, they're bringing them. You don't have to go find that seed round, they're bringing that. So that is an advantage. The trick is finding the right venture studio who's interested in your technology in the market that they care about. It's a low, we probably have what, 2 or 3 of those a year right now that we're forming out of NC State. Our startups are funded through those venture studio models, but we're seeing more and more of those form because the investors in general have moved upstream. They're not funding as much early stage development, and so this is one solution to that. There's some that are local. Many of them are nationwide. We actually worked with one out of Canada, out of Toronto, earlier this year. Yeah. Right. That's the big advantage, is that they will come in and kind of get you to the next milestone sooner, hopefully. And a lot of them have a kind of fast fail model, where they'll give you a 6-month or 1-year window, that if you achieve these milestones, we'll invest another $2 million. But if you don't, we're going to dissolve the company and walk away. And it might sound harsh, but at least you know your answer. And you can move on to the next day. So I think it's a really valuable, we're trying to figure out how do we do this at NC State. Is there a way to raise money to do this internally? That's something we're interested in. Yeah, I'd love to do that. But that's, has anybody got $5-10 million in there? No? Okay. Well, if you do, let me know. Great days to spend it. But I think there's things like that. And then we also have the ORC Advisors Network. That's the group of people I mentioned before, that if you truly are interested in wanting to get this off the ground, but you want somebody else to be on there with you to found it, all you have to do is let us know. We can look to our database and provide those introductions to figure out, is this a good fit? And then you can utilize something like the Boost program or Chancellor's Innovation Fund to get some of that funding in the door to start that process.
So on the venture studio, even though it appears bad, like the first attempt, but they still have the patent, right? So therefore, you do have revenues coming in from your patent, in addition to the equity you have in the company. So something to think about, right?
Yeah, so more recent development, a lot of these venture studios have been reaching out to the university. I would say it's still a very competitive process. They see a lot of technologies from a lot of universities, so they're trying to select the best to launch their companies out. They want to increase their chances of success as well. So I'd say it's still very much involvement from the faculty, especially at that early stage. So don't think it's like you just hand these people, they're going to do all the work, and you're just going to collect a paycheck. Like, that's not how it's going to be. Second, I'd say these groups are often very technologies, like focus areas. So for instance, like there's one out of NRL that's sponsored by Chevron, or there's one sponsored by Shell. There will be ones that are life science focused. So it's also you have to kind of match the studio to what you're working on as well. Like there's the one in Canada is like very AI focused, you know. But we try to make those introductions as much as possible. So when you disclose to your office and you say that that's a potential, we'll try to think, okay, who have we talked to, or which studios are of interest, and then we'll talk to you and say, hey, are you willing to go to entertain that, to talk to them? Because they're going to, you know, if you're interested in going down that route, you're going to have a conversation with them as well. They're going to have to have interest, and then we'll have to work out some deal that'll work out. But the Priya's point, I mean, yeah, when we do that license agreement, you're still going to get your better share of the royalty income, so you'll still get that 40% as well. But you will give up a lot of the equity side, is what Tim was saying. And I really have one last point. So I think a lot of folks were saying, like, hey, you know, you're doing a lot of involvement, and then maybe it'll drip off, and and then, you can start the next one. But I think that's great. That works out for like maybe 99%. But I would say there are a few examples of that that want to sell into it, decide to leave the university and go to the company.
You got a big house?
There is. I do think that is a potential option, something to think about from NC State's leadership, is like, we had Crystal Dalton, who's our new
Vice Chancellor of Research from at NC State, came from Georgia Tech. They have a very flexible leave policy with their faculty, where I think it's up to 3 years. You can leave and go do a startup opportunity and then come back with no penalty to your tenure and promotion. And all the things that you're responsible for. It is a big ask to have your PI or your faculty member leave for that period of time, but I think that's an opportunity to think about from NC State. How do we become competitive with universities that are offering that today, and enabling faculty who are and have those skill sets to go do that work, and then come back and continue to contribute to the university. So I don't think it's completely taboo. I mean, it does happen sparingly, but there are faculty who really do buy in all the way, and then maybe they come back and fund things at the university, or they have different roles and engagements with the university that aren't the traditional path. But yeah, I think our typical advice is that there's an opportunity for you to spin it out, still retain your role at the university. But definitely good things to think about in terms of how we support faculty in the long term.
Yeah, go ahead.
So most of the discussion up here is considering that you have an idea that's already patentable and there are patents, and then how do you commercialize it. But I want to take a step back. Like, let's say there's an industry that wants to sponsor research with me. So how can we lower the barrier for that company to come and work with me? Because a lot of companies, a lot of universities are actually lowering the barrier in terms of IP requirements, licensing requirements. And if a university XYZ is ready to work with that company, why should they work with NC State, right? Like, and considering the federal grants are like uncertain these days, so this question for Chris and Brian, how can we reduce the bureaucracy?
Yeah, so I think you raise a lot of great points. I agree with everything you're saying. So we have a new Vice Chancellor of Research who I think is very much on board with that message. Like, we should definitely be increasing the amount of industry-sponsored research that happens at the university, and we should try to use as many barriers as possible to making that happen, right? So I think industry-sponsored research, there's two things on that front. I think one, we're all working on very meaningful research that is applicable to industry. So for Krista's perspective, that'd be very much applied research that is solving a problem that industry wants to solve, right? So once we get a problem that they want to solve, and we know that they want to come here and solve that problem, right? Then there's this negotiation process that happens. There's a sponsor, there's a research compliance component, and then there's an intellectual property component of that as well, right? And so what we're trying to do is, we want to make sure that we follow the law as well, right, the policies of the system, while still retaining the flexibility to contract with these folks, right? And so there's other units on campus. I don't know how much sponsored research you do as well. So my office's involvement in that process is to manage the intellectual property portion. So anytime a company wants to go beyond the template agreement that we have, that goes beyond our options that we offer in intellectual property, then I'll step in and we'll have a negotiation with that company. And so sometimes those companies will ask for very stringent things that we may not be able to agree to. And if some other universities agree to it, I don't know how they ended up agreeing to that, but they just using it as a tactic to try to get us to shift position. But I'll say this on that point, and I'm trying to ramp and I'm trying to promote this, but we have some flexible intellectual property models that are not just one size fits all. We have actually 4 approaches called A, B, C, D. We have a website that links to it. It's probably more information than you need, but it's good for the lawyer on your side to say, hey, you have more than just this one option for intellectual property. You have 4 different options. And we're trying to make it incorporate a lot of feedback from industry, so we have that already in our contract, so we can start from a more advanced starting position as well when we negotiate with them. At the end of the day, also, we can just make investments, I think, in the research infrastructure to allow that to happen. I think we could see more industry-sponsored research. So I say it's definitely a focus area that we're working on, and we're trying to improve the process. And I guess if you have any other ideas or things that are particular pain points, I think we'd love to hear about that as well.
The pain point is, as a faculty, I have no idea where to begin. That's point number 1. And the industry also doesn't have any idea in terms of working out and having the patience to work with a university where there's a lot of bureaucracy. At some point, they lose interest and they say, okay.
I guess that's a consultant
and I'll work with them, right?
Yeah, so I mean, we do a significant amount of industry sponsor. I mean, we do roughly $60 million worth of industry sponsored research every year. I mean, but unfortunately, I say there's probably like only a handful that I've been in where we've had to like drop negotiations off after a period of time. But I would say, again, I would probably say that we were not the bad guys in that situation. You know, we tried to be as flexible as possible, and at the end of the day, you know, they probably pushed us over some breaking point. But I mean, again, we're all trying to get to yes, that's my philosophy. And we're also trying to be very responsive. I mean, I don't want it to be a delay on our side that caused you to, you know, to lose this research opportunity. And I feel like a lot of my colleagues in sponsored research would also feel the same. I would just say that, again, those people have quite a backlog of work to do, and so maybe there needs to be, like all the universities, you know, there's financial challenges we're facing, right? And so they have to do a lot with limited resources. But I would say, you know, from the observations I see, they're doing the best they can with, you know, the resources they have.
I mean, the only thing I can add to that is that I think it differs for different scenarios. I definitely would not say that it ends up being all bad or a brick wall every time you try to go down that path. I've had experiences where the university did negotiations with a brand new startup, which means that there was no track record, there was no prior communication. Everything was starting from anew. And they were able to go through the effective negotiations, get the contract in place, get the agreement regarding IP, et cetera. And then I've also done work with companies that have a master agreement where, you know, everything kind of sails through because they've done existing work with the university already. So I would say that for the most part, my experiences have been positive, not to say that some negative experiences haven't happened, but just keep trying to identify the right people to talk to would be my suggestion, because all the experiences aren't necessarily negative.
I'll add to that. I've had several industry-sponsored projects, some with large companies, several with startups, and I think my experience has been really similar. Most of the time, as long as, you know, depending on the size of the company, sometimes those negotiations can actually go quite quickly, which is very beneficial because going from a conversation where the industry partner decides they want to fund something that your lab is doing to actually being able to access those funds can actually be quite quick as long as the partner is favorable and with some of the standing terms. So I think, yeah, just having the conversations and seeing where it goes.
I don't have a lot to add to what others have said, but I think you're talking about the context of a company that wants to do sponsored research with kind of a defined like statement of work and deliverables. So it's actually a contract. It's not a gift, right? So negotiating those terms, that generally runs through the Office of Research and Innovation, through the Sponsored Programs Office, and if anything ever gets locked up where you're not sure what's going on, you can always reach out to me. I'm not the one who controls that process, but I can reach out to try to find out what's going on or what's not going on, if that's the case. We also, and you may have heard the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation, Krista Walton, if you've attended any of her town halls, for example. She's had one, and there's one coming up. And if you didn't attend the first one, I would encourage attending the second one. And if you did attend the first one, I encourage. She's trying to be very open and transparent about what she's doing. And I would say what I hear her saying in the town hall is the same thing I hear. I have a one-on-one monthly meeting with her. In fact, my next one is this afternoon. And so I think she's very transparent. She has commissioned a firm to kind of take stock of our research administration enterprise. Of course, she's aware of, she just came on board about 5 months ago, but she's aware of things like the Research Leadership Academy Open Letter and some work that had happened when Randy Woodson was still chancellor to look at research administration support services. But as a new VCRI, she kind of wants to look at this with fresh eyes. So I think this issue that you raise is something that is being shared with the consultant that she's brought in. And so I'm pretty confident that, you know, it'll be looked at. So it's not really an answer per se, but the answer is yes, we're looking, the big we are looking at it.
I have a question for Dr. Brown about kind of the story that you told, you know, founding your company and kind of bringing it through the stages. So I'm, you know, early career faculty. Finding funding is the main kind of mission at the moment. You said something really interesting, which was that you founded your company and then were able to apply to SBIR. And so my pain point with SBIRs as a mechanism thus far has been finding teaming partners, right? So to be able to found your own teaming partner, in a sense, is a very attractive proposition. So I wonder whether you might be able to share the like kind of specific things that you did to found this company and thus become eligible to be on both sides of that particular table.
Yeah, so I will say I was completely clueless about how, like, the nuts and bolts of what you do, right? And I'll say since it's been about 5 years, a little over 5 years now, and we had the pandemic right after, some of the specifics I don't remember exactly. But I worked closely with the RCE office and worked with one of the law firms, my co-founders at the time. I think it cost us like $1,000 to incorporate. So you have to fill out all the paperwork. The law firm drew up all of the paperwork for us. We got it submitted. Once that was signed and we were official as a company, of course we were just on paper and completely virtual. Then we were able to get some of the accounts that we needed. We had to file as a small business. We submitted our first SBIR through NIH, so there's about a 6-week lead time from when you incorporate until you can expect to have all of the things that you need to actually be able to submit the grant, like actually having a ERA Commons account, the nuts and bolts of things to actually be able to do these. And I'll say, as a faculty member, when I went to submit our first grant as the company, I was so clueless about some of the things that happen on the back end with the submission, and it really opened my eyes. It took a lot more effort than I anticipated. So if you're planning on doing it, then you need about at least 6 weeks between incorporating and then actually submitting your grant. So, and even longer when the government shuts down. Actually, I had a colleague who was dealing with this during the shutdown. We were actually able to help them with their submission, but that's another story. So those are the initial nuts and bolts. But then there's other things too. Once the funding comes through, how do you set that up? How do you actually transfer the funds? You have to fill out all this paperwork. What does that paperwork look like? So what I did was I got with colleagues that had recently gone through a process. Specifically, I worked with Josh Pierce. So at the time, he had just founded his company, and they had just been awarded their first SBIR. So he was kind of to sit down with me and kind of go through the individual steps of what they had done. He kind of walked me through their accounting and setting up all these, starting opening a business banking account, things that I've not even thought about, but you need to have all your books and processes in place. So I was able to talk to him and also colleagues at ORC who provide a lot of insight into just the nuts and bolts of what you need to do. Things like establishing facilities use agreements at the university. I had no experience with, and this is actually, Chris might find this funny, he obviously was not in the role at the time, but we were establishing a facilities use agreement with NC State, and so we had to set up a core, and I filled it out and wrote down what I thought was a good price. Apparently that is not how it works. I submitted it, and at the time they said, well, where did you get this hourly rate for the facilities? And I said, well, I mean, seems right. So apparently there's an official process. But people, and that's the official process for many of these things. And then of course you have to deal, I'm like going on a little bit of a tangent here, but there's a lot to do up front, and talking to colleagues and that have been through it was particularly helpful. And then talking to, all the resources here at State, and then also managing COI. That's a whole other aspect of it. You really have to work very closely with the COI office, and they'll help you set up a conflict of interest management plan, but working really closely with them and making sure all the things that we were establishing on the company side were compliant, and they were great and have continued to be great to work with, but just making sure that everything's in place. So talk to as many people as you can.
And I'll mention as part of that process, we definitely have worked with a lot of startups who go after that funding. Almost all of the startups out of NC State will apply for an SBIR at some point. Some do it earlier than others, but I think there's a kind of standard expectation of what the faculty member's role will be. Kind of the best advice at the high level is you have to choose a side. You typically cannot serve on both sides of the grant, because the grant is to the startup company, and then there's a subcontract back to your lab in most cases. You're not required to do that if it's an SBIR, if it's an STTR, you are. There's a whole bunch of rules. We will have another workshop on kind of the details of this with a panel, I think in somewhere around March or April of next year, so keep that in mind. You're getting the emails, so that's a good first step. But in addition to that, our team has checklists, has guidance documents, has PowerPoint presentations of kind of overall overview of the process, and then the Boost Fund program is something that's built off of something called Sparkplug. And that was a program that's specifically focused on bringing in grant writing consultants to work with early stage startups. We understand that you might feel like you're an expert in writing a grant, but writing an SBI grant is different. And once you go through it once with a consultant, you may not have to go back. But it's a low-risk kind of way to get an expert to help you with that process. And many of the ones will help you with writing, putting together commercialization strategies for the grant itself, finding the best place to apply, and then go through the actual process of submitting. So they're there, you pay for it, it's not free, but it's something that we have access to funding to help support that. So we fund about 6 to 8 of those a year, those types of projects to help people get across the finish line and get that first grant submitted. But yeah, and I think the trickiest part for most people is finding who will be the PI for the startup company. Because the faculty member, again, pick a side, you're probably going to stay as the subcontract PI and your faculty role. You have to find somebody to fill that role. And with NIH, the rules are a little bit more flexible. NSF and everybody else, it's pretty strict on who that person can be and what requirements they have. That's often where a postdoc who can reduce their amount of time commitment, a graduating graduate student, or a research professional in the office could potentially serve as that role. And that's the most common way to do it. And the most important thing with that is it's all perspective. You don't have to have all that nailed down when you apply. If you get the award, 9 months later, you have to figure that stuff out. But when you apply, it's understood that everybody won't have those roles day one when you apply. When you receive the money, you do have to have all that figured out. And we have worked with the granting agencies when people have gone on to get different jobs, so that having to replace that PI role is possible. They don't like to do it, but I think they've always done it. They haven't returned money for that reason. But yeah, it's a new process. It's similar to your grant writing and grant submission process, but it is its own unique path, and we've got lots of tools and support materials and experts to help with the process.
I have a question on what you just said.
Sure.
So you said on the subcontract PI on the university side can be an existing graduate student in our group.
I think
if I was a PI on this.
It's typically the faculty member where the lab is coming from. So for the startup side, the startup PIs, the PI rules for SBIRs are not the same as for a typical research grant. You don't have to have a PhD to be a PI on a SBIR grant. It's just somebody who can feasibly do the work you're trying to do. So often, then, in most cases, for a phase one, it's $300,000 to $500,000. You're not going to be able to do that much work. It's a lot of outsourcing, so you're finding vendors to do a lot of things. You're probably not going and buying a bunch of equipment and building your own lab as part of that. So you're using other people's equipment and maybe the university's equipment as part of that. It's really a project manager role. So can you coordinate all the different experts and people and subcontractors you're working with, keeping the trains on time? That's the job. And so if somebody's got experience doing that, like a lab manager or somebody that's a postdoc or somebody's overseen these types of projects before, that's usually a good fit there.
Yeah, and I'll add, we actually did the opposite, the first SPIR or CTR that we put in. So I put it in as PI on the company side, and then the university affiliate, that specific project was looking at stability and doing in vivo work. So we had a colleague at the vet school who served as the PI on the university side. So I think it's going to be dependent on what your specific project is. We had a subsequent, our second SCTR that came through, we did the opposite. The postdoc who then was working full-time at the company, she was PI on the company side, and then my subcontracted to my lab. So I think it just depends on the project and how you're setting things up. Ultimately, we actually ended up transferring the PI role to the previous postdoc on that first one as well, but that was after it got funded. There was a little bit of strategy there because we thought that it would review a little bit better. Having served on many SBIR and CTR panels, there was definitely some strategy there. And that is also something, as Tim mentioned, is not uncommon, is to switch the PI role after things are going.
This is from nuclear engineering. So I guess my question is regarding SBIR or CTR, right? What I saw in most of the cases is the PI is not the faculty themselves, right? So the postdoc or PhD student or something like that. My question is, since SBIR and CTR is limited for your city, right? In that case, can you use some international postdoc or PhD student as a PI for your startup, or you can only use your citizenship or green card or that kind of thing? That's my question.
I think international are allowed.
Yeah, I think it usually comes down to the type or the ownership of the company is where the restrictions lie. So having a role in SBIR grant is distinct and separate from who owns equity in the startup. So I think the PI role for the grant, I think, is a little bit more flexible, but the company must be 51% or more owned by naturalized U.S. citizens or U.S. entities. So if you have an investor or you have equity holders in the business, like the founders of the company have certain requirements for how much foreign ownership can exist in the company. But the SBIR role of PI, I think, is a little bit more flexible, and you can't have internationals serve in that role as long as they have the ability to be here and have a visa to work.
Yeah, that's another question. I mean, let's say for a postdoc or teaching student, you already have limited periods, right? Because in the US, you already can work into the green card or something.
Yeah, there are resources. There's a couple of investors that focus specifically on international students and funding them, and they have a lot of guidance about how to navigate that process. But startups can sponsor students. You just have to pay for it. So I think, thankfully, I haven't seen the latest Truth Social about whether the $100,000 thing is actually happening or not, but I think it was recently come out that they were not going to charge that for people who were coming from student visas, I think was the process. I haven't kept up with it recently, but it is a fee. I think it's like $5,000 to $10,000 for the company pays to sponsor the student. So as long as the startup has the capability to sponsor the person, then you just have to build that into your finances for the company. Within the state of North Carolina, if you get an SBIR grant, I think it's at $75,000 right now. You get from the state, no questions asked. You can use for whatever you want. 75K from the state. It's called the Small Business 1NC program. It's great. It's first come, first serve. It does run out periodically. But it's a pool of money available for awardees of SBIR grants, and a lot of times people use that $75,000 for other business expenses that you can't cover with an SBIR grant, because it's really an R&D grant, and you can't really do everything you'd want to do, but you can hopefully maybe sponsor somebody with that funding.
And one means you can get it at one time.
Yes, yeah. Fortunately, you can't get it multiple times, but yeah, it is a great way to incentivize getting that first grant through the door.
Did you get one?
Thank you very much. Yes.
So I've been tracking things. We still have more audience than panelists, but we're getting close. And so I think this is a good opportunity for us to move to kind of the closing. So I just wanted to ask, each of you, is there something you wanted to share you haven't yet shared, or just as a brief closing remark? And maybe we'll start with Brian and work our way back.
So I guess my remark is, my office wants to be helpful to you and responsive to you. So again, I just encourage you to reach out to your own individual specific situation, and we can have a conversation. And I just would ask that you communicate with your colleagues as well. I mean, we want to be an office that's easy to work with. We want, to work with you as much as possible. So that'd be my final message.
I mean, for me, this direction has been extremely rewarding. And the idea that, I think I brought it up earlier, that you don't have to have a clear understanding of everything to move forward, I think becomes key. Just getting started, identifying again places where the work that you're doing can make an impact, identifying the potential customers, potential stakeholders, and then identifying the path, and then talking with people that have gone through it already, I think becomes important. So I would just say this is something that is of interest, so just go for it.
I completely agree. I mean, I think if you've got any inkling, go for it and see how it goes, and don't be afraid of not knowing things, because there's lots of unknowns in this process, but there's a lot of support here and in the triangle to help.
One thing I always point to is, I think the statistic I saw at some point, 80% of PhD students will never set foot in an academic lab once they defend. We are doing a disservice to the students if we don't encourage them to look at opportunities that exist out of the traditional academic path. And I think you have the opportunity to expose them to those things while on campus. And we have lots of ways to do that. There's courses, there's accelerators, there's events, there's competitions. So try to at least share information with them, encourage them if possible. If you're encouraging them to go down that path, or at least expose them to it, because I think that's where the future of kind of the innovation comes from, is from the graduate students and postdocs that exist on campus.
I'm going to sort of echo what others said. Just do it. That's my thing. Go for it. Yeah, Mikey method, right? I think it is a little bit scary, and it feels like there's a lot of things you need to do, and you always put it off. Albert Lefty and I were chatting about it just a couple of days back. He said, I always want to do it, but there's this long list of things I need to finish, but you can't get there unless you take the first step. I mean, we see Kranos, they have done it, and it kind of works out, right? And I think that's my advice, just do it. There's great resources on campus. I'm around. I mean, I'm happy to chat with anyone who wants to just bounce ideas off me. That's also obviously there. But in essence, if you don't try to, and if you don't try, maybe you're missing buying that yacht and the airplane and all those things you wanted to buy, right? So there's that path. So my advice would be just go for it.
All right. Please join me in thanking our panel. Also, thank you for being here. And we're now in equilibrium because we have 6 and 6. Please help yourself to food, and feel free to take it further. Thank you so much. And look for a survey. We'll get something out to get your feedback. So thanks again.
Yes, I'm glad you came.
All right.
You ready to make the leap?
I